Masechet Baba Kama Daf Kof Yod Tet, the last daf of the Masechet. Velo Mishomere Perot, the Mishnah taught that one may not buy fruit or wood from a watchman of produce, because since he's only the watchman and he's selling it, it's likely that he's stealing it from the owner and selling it, and you can't buy stolen goods. Rav Zeven shebishtar me'arisa. Amar le'Abaye v'hatanan lo mishomere perot asim uperot. Rav bought produce from a sharecropper. Abaye asked him from our Mishnah, you're not allowed to buy produce from a watchman. Amar le hanemil b'shomed delete begufa dad amidi avalaris tiitle begave ema mid nafshe ka mizaben. And I've explained there's a difference between a sharecropper and a watchman. If it's a watchman, he has no share in the produce. He has nothing. He gets nothing from it. He just gets paid an hourly wage for watching it. However, a sharecropper does have a share in the produce. That's why he's called a sharecropper. He doesn't own the land, but he gets to keep some part of whatever he produces, and therefore it could very well be that he is selling his share. So that's perfectly legal. Tenor Rabbanan, Shomere Perot ochin mehen keshen yoshvin umochrin v'asalin lifnehem v'tur taneh lifnehem v'cholan shamru hatmen asur. So here this Braita teaches that even watchmen you can buy from if they are sitting and selling produce with baskets in front of them and scales. They have a whole storefront, so they're doing it very publicly. Therefore, the owner the owner knows about it, and it's with the owner's permission. If he's doing it surreptitiously, then that's curious, and we have to suspect that he is stealing. But if he has a whole setup there, then it must be that he actually has permission from the owner. He made some kind of deal. And in any case, if whoever's selling it to you says, listen, can you hide it? No matter what kind of storefront he has, if he's telling you to hide it, that means he's doing something wrong, and therefore you cannot trust him and cannot buy from him. And similarly, one can purchase from a watchman at the entrance of the garden, but not from the back of the garden. Again, if it's the entrance of the garden, then it's public, and therefore we can assume the owner knows about it and is okay with it. But if it says, come to the back alley, you only sell things in the back alleyway that are illegal, so therefore do not engage in that. Itmar kazlan me'emat mutar liknot hemenu Rav amar ad sheteherov mishelo Shmuel amar afilu miut mishelo. So now halacha about a thief. When can you buy from him? If you know it's stolen items, obviously you can't. But what if he mixes up his own items with the stolen items? What about a mixture? So Rav says, as long as the majority is his own possession and a minority is stolen, so then batel bidov, we can follow the majority. I don't know which particular thing. He's selling a whole bunch of items. Some are stolen, some are not. So if it's the majority, then I can assume that whatever I'm buying is not stolen. And Shmuel says, even if a little bit of it is his, and most of it is stolen goods, still I can say, well, maybe this item that I'm buying is from the minority that belongs to him. I don't know for sure that this is a stolen item, so therefore it's obviously the robber's responsibility to return stolen items. The buyer's responsibility is just to make sure that it's possible that this is not a stolen item. Rav Yehuda instructed Ada, his attendant, to follow the opinion of Shemuel that says even if some of it, a little bit of it, is his own property, that's permitted. Mamon as masor Rav Huna v'Rav Yehuda chad amar mutar labedo beyad v'chad amar asur labedo beyad. Property of an informer like we saw on the previous couple of dapim, is someone who goes to the authorities and say, hey, this guy has he has a whole bank in his basement. There's jewels in there, right? Go and get it. So since he's informing upon others, he has a share in the guilt. So we didn't like informers very much. And now what can you do with the property of informers? There's two opinions. One says you can destroy it actively. This is stolen goods. He got it illegally. You can go and destroy it yourself. And others say, no, you cannot physically destroy it. You can stop him in other ways, but you can't actively do so. Man de'amar mutal abedo biyad, lo yehem amano chamor migufo. The opinion that says you're allowed to go and destroy it directly will argue that his money shouldn't be treated any more stringently than his body. We saw before, snitches get stitches. Someone who informs, remember Rav Kahana, he actually killed him. Informers weren't only putting property of other Jews in danger, but even their lives, if the authorities with thugs would come and take the stuff, and then he's going to start complaining. Easier to just kill him and take his stuff. So these are really dangerous people, and therefore you're even allowed to kill him. Certainly you'd be allowed to destroy their property. One who says do not destroy their property directly would argue that even though this informer is evil, but maybe they'll have children who are good, who will inherit, and they'll use it for good. As the pasuk in Yov says, the wicked prepare, and then the just wicked prepare a garment, and the just will put it on. Rambam cites this as well as one of the reasons why Sadi Rasha V'tov Lo. Sometimes an evil person gets good because the evil person works hard to build a beautiful house so that he can die and someone who's worthy will take it over. And so, let him have it. He doesn't deserve it, but maybe he'll have children who will. Rav Chisda Eliyahu Arisa dava takil v'yahib takil v'shakil salke kara nafshe v'safun l'sadik chel hote. Rav Chisda had a sharecropper who would weigh the produce and give Rav Chisda his portion, and we would weigh again and take his own portion. Rav Chisda, for some reason, was not happy with this and fired the sharecropper. And he said the pasuk about himself, a good man leaves inheritance to his children's children. The wealth of a sinner is laid up for the righteous. The sinner here being the sharecropper, and now that he fired the sharecropper, Rav Chisda, the righteous, can keep everything. Now, it's not clear what the sharecropper did wrong. It actually seems like he was very meticulous in making sure that he's giving an exact amount to the Rav Chisda, the owner, and keeping exact amount himself. He's not taking any more, any less. So there's a few explanations. One is that he was actually weighing in a false way. He's using a light stone when he measures out what Rav Chisda takes, and then a heavy stone, so he is actually taking more than Rav, so he found that he was looking like he was being very meticulous, but actually he was stealing. Kima tikvat chanef ki yibsa ki yeshel Eloah nafsho. Now more on that theme, we quote another pasuk from Iyov. That says, what is the hope of the godless, though he profits, when God takes away his soul, right? In other words, someone who steals and doesn't care about God and morality, right? What good is what he takes when God will take away his soul, which sounds like God will kill the robber. But there's two interpretations of this nafsho. Rav Huna v'Rav Chisda. Chadama nafsho de nigzal, v'chadama nafsho shel gazlan. One says it's actually the soul of the robbed person. In other words, the robber is taking away the soul of the victim. By stealing from someone, you're taking away not only their money, but also, as we're going to see in a second, their means of eating, and thereby also taking away their soul. Whereas the other opinion takes it more at face value, that because you stole, you're not going to benefit from it because God will kill the robber. Manda man nafsho shel nigzal dichtib ken orchot kol bosei abasa et nefesh be'alav yikach. The one who says is talking about the soul of the victim. He has a pasuk to back him up, because it says, so the ways of everyone that is greedy for profit, it takes away the soul of the owner thereof. The owner meaning the victim who owned this item that was stolen. Not only is he robbed of his property, but it's also the feeling that you get if you ever get something robbed from you, right? Even if it's a small item that's not worth so much, you just feel like you feel violated, like you feel totally unprotected, like they could take that. So they could take your life. So that is a proof that it's the soul of the victim. Manda man nafsho shel gazlan tichtiv al tigzol dal ki dal hu ve'al yedakeh ani bashar ki Hashem yariv libam ve'kaba et kob ahem nafesh. Pasuk from Mishle, do not rob the weak because he is weak. Neither crush the poor in the gate, because Hashem will plead their cause and despoil of life those who despoil them. Means Hashem will take revenge on the robber and take away the robber's life. So that's clearly an intertext that shows that's the life of the robber that Hashem will take. Now we ask each opinion about the pasuk that the other brought. V'idach nami haketib nefesh be'alav yikach. Doesn't the pasuk say that the robber takes away the soul of the owner? That means the true owner of the item when he is stolen from. Also, his soul is taken. He can answer, "My be'alav dehashta." What does owner mean? It means the current owner, meaning the robber. He doesn't legitimately own it, but it means the soul of the now owner who took the item. Hashem will take his soul as punishment for stealing. And the one who says it's the Nigzal's life that is taken, what is he going to do with this pasuk that says Hashem will despoil the life of the despoiler, meaning the robber? He'll say this is giving explanation. What is the reason that Hashem will despoil the life of those who despoil them? Because the robber despoiled the soul of the victim. So it's just a chain reaction, because stealing from someone is equivalent to taking their life. Therefore, Hashem will take revenge on the robber by taking the robber's life. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol הגוזל את חברו שווה פירוטה, כאילו נוטל נשמתו ממנו, שנאמר, כן אורחות כל בוסע בעשה את נפש בעליו ייקח, ואומר, ואכל כסירך ולחמך ובניך ובנותיך. Rabbi Yochanan teaches, anyone who robs someone else, even if it's just one piruta, it's not always about the monetary amount, it's just taking something that is not yours, and that he feels therefore vulnerable that is taken, or maybe he really needs that, even that piruta, if he's a poor person. It's as if he's taking his soul. And we bring a few proofs. Number one, a pasuk in Mishle, so are the ways of everyone that is greedy for profit. It takes away the life of the owner. There you go, it takes away the life. It doesn't matter how much it is. And second, from Yirmiyah, and they shall consume your harvest and your bread. And the continuation is that they shall consume your sons and your daughters. In other words, by taking their harvest and their bread, now the person, even if it's not so the monetary value of the harvest and the bread might be just a few dollars, nevertheless, by taking that, now that owner will not be able to feed his children, and then they will starve. So if that's his meal, and you steal a person's meal for his family, they will starve. That's taking away his life. ואומר, מחמס בני יהודה אשר שפכו דם נקי בארצם, ואומר אל שאול, אל בית הדמים אשר על אשר המית את הגבעונים. And now, yet two more proofs, one from Yoel. Egypt will be desolate, and Edom will be desolate wilderness, because they extorted the children of Judah, and they've shed innocent blood. So in other words, Egypt and Edom Hashem is going to take revenge against them. Why? Because they extorted Yehudah. That means, extorted means they forcibly took, and even if they paid something for it, some little amount for what they stole, that's Hamas, that's still stealing, extortion. And because they did that, that's equivalent to shedding innocent blood. And so they'll get what's coming to them for that. And so here again, Hamas, extortion, is equated with shedding blood. And then Shaul, is for Shaul, for his bloody house, because Shaul killed the Giv'onim. Now we don't find that he killed the Giv'onim, but we're going to explain that it's referring to stealing the livelihood of the Giv'onim, and thereby that's considered the same as shedding their blood. Now the question is, why do you need 4 Pesukim to teach the same thing? What does each add that the other didn't? So maybe you'll say stealing from a person is like killing that person, but not necessarily it's like killing his sons and daughters. That's why we bring the second pasuk, Tashema besar banav ubnotav. His kids are dependent on him. If he has no food, he can't feed his kids, and so you're killing them too. And maybe you'll say that's only if the robber takes the owner's food and he has nothing at all. But if he pays for it by extortion, maybe then that's not like murder. Tashema mechamas b'nei Yehuda sheshvutam naki be'arsam. That extorting b'nei Yehuda, even though they paid something for it, but he needs this food now, and this money is not. He didn't want to sell it. He needs the food. The money is not sufficient. and therefore that's also like murder, and Edom will be will be punished for that. And maybe you'll say that's only if you rob actively, actually take the person's thing. But if it's indirectly, maybe that would not be considered murder. Tashema el shul ve'bet hadamim al asher hemit et hagivonim. V'chi echad masinu sharag shol hagivonim ela mitoch sharag nov ir hakohanim shir maspikin lahen mayim mazon ma'aleh alav hakatub ke'ilu haragan. So we learn from the following story that even indirect causation of stealing is also like murder, because when it talks about Shaul and his bloody house because he killed the Givonim, where do we see that he killed the Givonim? Doesn't say that before, actively killed the Givonim. Rather, Shaul directed Doeg HaAdomi to kill Nov, Ir HaKohanim. They killed all the Kohanim in Nov, which was the sanctuary town of that had holy bread there. And Nov, the city of Kohanim, would provide the Givonim with water and food. The Givonim were the servants, and they had to carry the wood. And so they would provide those materials, like the wood, for the Nov Ir HaKohanim, and then they would get their salary. They would get food and water as their salary. So their salary, Givonim's salary, was dependent on Nov Ir HaKohanim. Shaul caused the murder of all the Kohanim in Nov, and now that sanctuary was not functioning anymore, and therefore they weren't hiring the Givonim to bring them the materials of the wood, and therefore they did not get paid their water and food, and so that was taken from them. Now this is very indirect. Nevertheless, Shaul is called the bloody house, because he indirectly caused the Givonim to lose out on their livelihood. Aval lochin min hanashim. Back to the Mishnah that says one is allowed to purchase items from married women in certain places where it's assumed that the husband would be okay with the woman selling these items where they usually grow. We'll elaborate on this Mishnah. As the Mishnah said, that one can buy from women wool in Judea and linen in Galilee. Right? That's where they grow, and the women there are dealing with the goods, and therefore it's assumed that the husbands are fine and happy with women selling these items. But married women cannot sell wine, oil, and flour, because women aren't usually selling these things, and we assume that it's not with their husband's permission. They're just taking the household stash of wine, selling it, and making money on the side, and using it to buy, clothes or makeup, what. One can also not buy from slaves or from children, because the assumption is the slave stole something from the house that he wasn't allowed to and is selling it, or from children that do not have permission from the father or the owner. Abash says a woman is allowed to sell some items worth 4 or 5 dinar in order to make a cap for her head. This is a picture here of a cap that a woman would wear normally, and so if she needs a cap, so she needs to buy materials to make it. So we assume the husband would be acceptable. It would be acceptable to the husband for her to sell a few items just to get a little bit of money, so that she can buy a cap, so she can properly cover her head. In all cases, if the seller says, "Hey, hide this, put this in a bag, don't show anyone that I sold it," then we have to be suspicious that these are stolen goods, and you can't buy it. A charity collector is going around collecting charity, and if a woman gives him a little bit, some change, right, a little bit of amount, that's fine, he can accept it, but not a lot. In other words, if he's going around house to house, he's to collect charity for the communal fund, and the woman comes and takes out a whole safe, $1 million, he can't accept that, because he can't be sure that the husband is okay with her giving away all the family savings. But if she just gives him a few dollars, then we assume that the husband is fine with his wife giving to charity some small change. והבדדין לוקחים מהן זיתים במידה ושמן במידה, ולא זיתים במועט ושמן במועט. Olive pressers, you can buy from them a lot of oil, but not a little bit, or olives, but not a little bit of olives or a little bit of oil. You can buy a lot because if the olive presser sells a lot, the owner obviously will notice, right? I gave you this huge amount of olives. Where's all the olives? So since the owner will notice and he's selling it, we assume that he's selling it with the owner's permission. But if it's only a little bit, then we suspect that the olive presser is skimming off the top, just selling a little bit of the olive oil or the olives, and the owner won't notice. And therefore, he's not the owner, so we have to suspect that he's stealing it. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, לוקחים מן נשים זיתים במועט בגליל העליון, שפעמים אדם בוש למכור על פתח ביתו ונותן לאשתו ומוכרת. The opposite is the case regarding women in the Galilee. Their olives were very expensive, and so there you could buy a little bit of a small amount of olives, because there it happens often that the husband is embarrassed to sell in front of his house. Maybe there it shows that he's poor, that he has to sell a few olives to make some extra money, so he's embarrassed to do that. But he tells his wife, listen, if someone comes around, sell them some olives, we need some extra change. And so therefore it's likely that if she's selling some olives from the front of her house, that the husband is okay with it. If it's a little bit, and in the Galilee where it was particularly expensive. Ravina ikla lebe mechoza, tu neshid lebe mechoza, remu kame kable veshire kabel minayu. Now a story about Ravina. He came to be mechoza, and the woman of the city came and threw at him chains and bracelets for charity, right? To take and give to the poor. So these are obviously very expensive items. And we just saw that this is not allowed. Amar le Rabba tosfa'a l'Ravina, v'tanya gabe tzedakah mekablim ten davar mu'at, aval lo davar merubeh, so Rabba tosfa'a es Ravina. Charity collectors can accept from women only a little bit of change that we assume, their husbands will be okay. It's good to give charity, but you can't go and give away all your jewelry. That the husbands would not want that. We cannot assume that they would want that, and therefore you're not allowed to accept it. Why did you accept all of their jewelry for charity? And Ravina explained, we're in Mechoza. Mechoza was a suburb of the capital of the Persian Empire, cosmopolitan, big city. The people there were very wealthy. And so Ravina, knowing that, says, these little trinkets, these chains and bracelets, they're small compared to what else they have. So this is just the extra jewelry that they don't care about. That's what they're giving. So therefore, this is for them something small, and we can assume that the husbands would be acceptable for them giving away these items for charity. But at least does show that they were wealthy, but also that they were very charitable and generous. And the last Mishnah of the Masechet teaches, Mochin shakoves mosi hare elu shelo. Really getting down to the wire here to discuss threads of a garment, who gets to keep them. Part of the laundering process is that some threads may come off during the laundering process, and so the launder is allowed to keep them because very, very little of the wool comes off during laundering. However, the carder, you give him wool to brush, and there a lot of the wool is going to come off during that brushing process, and so we assume that the owner wants it back. The owner's okay for the launder to keep just a little bit of what comes off, but if it's substantial, then that's worth money, and he will want it back, so he cannot keep it. כובס נוטל 3 חוטים והן שלו, יתר מכן הרי הוא של בעל הבית. אם היה שחור על גבי לבן, נוטל את הכל והן שלו. A launder can keep 3 threads. We're talking about a new garment. When a garment would come new from the factory, from the sewer, they would add in extra threads. Kind of like today when you buy a suit and the pockets are sewn together or the back flap has a thread in it. So during the manufacturing process and shipping, it's good to have those threads in, but they're not supposed to stay there. They don't look good. I'm supposed to take them out. So they would, the customer would give it to the launderer first, and that was part of the launderer's job, is to take out these extra threads. who gets the threads? Well, if it's up to 1, 2, or 3 threads, then the launderer can keep them, because that's very little, and we assume the customer doesn't care about them. But if it's more than 3, then he has to give it back to the customer, because then they're useful. They don't throw anything out in the olden days. Even four threads, well, you could use it for something. However, if the threads that the original manufacturer put in were black and the garment is white, so then these stand out and the customer does not want them. They just don't look good at all. So then the launderer can keep all of them, even if it's more than 3. החייט ששייר את החוט כדי לתפור בו ומטלית שהיא 3x3 הרי אלו של בעל הבית. If you give something to a tailor, you'd give him not only the garment but also the material, the thread to use to fix the garment. So if after the tailor's done, he still has sufficient extra of the thread that you could use it to sew with, or let's say the customer gives him a patch, right? So here's my garment, originally has a hole in it, and here gives him a large piece of cloth as a patch, and the tailor finishes, and he still has a small amount, 3 by 3 finger breadths. That's useful. That's the minimum amount of cloth that you can use for something. So if it's sufficient that's useful for something, the tailor has to give it back to the owner, because the owner will want it. It's his. But if it's smaller than that, then that's just scraps, and that the tailor can keep it. מה שהחרש מוציא במעשר הרי אלו שלו, ובקשיל של בעל הבית. ואם היה עושה אצל בעל הבית, אף נסרים של בעל הבית. If you have a carpenter, and so the customer gives the carpenter some wood, and the carpenter is shaving it down with an adze, that's this thing here, and so it removes some of the wood to make it nice and even. So that's only those shavings are a little bit. So therefore, the carpenter can keep it. But if he's cutting it with an axe is going to chop off significant parts of the wood that are valuable. Then you have to assume that the owner wants it back and he cannot keep it. However, that's only if the customer is bringing the material to the workshop of the carpenter. So then the carpenter is working as a contractor to do the whole job. In that case, he can keep a small amount of it's just an adze. However, if the carpenter comes to the home of the owner and is doing it there he's not working as a contractor, but as a laborer. And so in that case, even the sawdust belongs to the customer, because he's in the customer's house. So the carpenter cannot even take sawdust with him. So this is the final Mishnah of the Masechet, and is dealing with sawdust. I think there's an important lesson here. You might think, well, how is this a nice grand ending to this Masechet, which is all about damages? And I think the answer is that, yes, someone who really cares about being ethical should care even about sawdust. And if a person is sensitive to think about who deserves the sawdust from doing a little bit of work in someone's house versus taking it there, right? Or some shavings. Then damage is not only about the $1 million deal or the $100 thing or the shoplifter who takes a piece of candy. One has to be sensitive to even this little strand, little tiny patch of a cloth. All right, that should be a level of attention to think about to make sure that we do not take anything that doesn't belong to us and not to cause any damage at all. So I think it's actually a perfect way to bring home the point that the details really matter when it comes to everything, including interpersonal relationships. Teno Rabbanan, Lokhin mochin min hakobes, mipnei shehen shelo. Hakobes notel shenechutin alyonim vehen shelo. Then we have a braita that expands on the Mishnah and says that you're allowed to buy strands of wool from a launderer, because we just said that a launderer is allowed to keep a little bit of the strands of wool, so you can assume that they really belong to him. And a launderer is allowed to take 2 threads of a garment. So when he's taking off the extra threads of a new garment, Mishnah said 3. The Gemara will ask about that. לא יטיל בו יותר מ3 חובין, ולא יסרוק הבגד לשיטיו, אלא לערבו בו. ומשווה לאורכו, אבל לא לרוחבו, ואם בא לשבות, ad atefach rashai. That's the rest of the baraita. a carder, he's taking a piece of cloth and he wants to stretch it out, right? After it was, as part of the process of laundering, it would get smaller, so he's got to stretch it out. And what they would do is they would put 3 stitches at the edges and attach the stitches to nails to stretch it out. So the law says he should only put up to 3 stitches, because the more you stretch it out, the more uneven it's going to get. And so you're going to stretch it out too much, become more uneven. You're going to have to cut off after he stretches it out. Then they even it out by cutting off the pieces sticking out. So you don't want to stretch too much, because then you're going to have to cut off too much. But you want to stretch it enough that it'll have a good shape. So it shouldn't be more than 3. And when the carder is combing it to make it look nice, he should not comb it along the warp, but rather along the weft. If you do it along the warp, that's kind of going against the grain, and that will make it weaker. So don't go along the warp, but rather along the weft. So it will still look nice, but not damage the garment. And then after it's stretched and he has to cut it, so he should even it out along the length, but not along the width. Along the length is when you're wearing it, you can see that side of it, and it won't look nice if it's all bumpy. But along the width, you can't tell, so don't cut off because it doesn't matter. And when he cuts off to the length to make it even, he's allowed to cut off even up to a tefach. Because even though that's a lot of material, but still, you want it to make sure that it looks nice when he is wearing it. That's the end of the Braita. Now we ask a few questions about it. Amar Moshe nechutin v'anan tenan shalosh. In this Braita says that the launderer can keep 2, but our Mishnah says he can keep 3 of those extra strings that you are put into the garment whilst being manufactured. It's not a question. If the Braita is talking about strong, thick threads that are very useful, even 2 that he can keep, but 3 the owner wants back. Whereas if it's thin threads, then we let the tailor keep even 3, but 4 the owner would want back. The Braita that we cited said you should not comb it along the warp, but there's a Braita that says the opposite. So how do we deal with that? The first Braita, the one that we quoted above, is talking about a daily garment where it has to stay strong because you're wearing it all the time. And so therefore you don't want to weaken it. And that's why it says don't do it along the warp. However, if you're talking about an elegant cape that you wear just once in a while, and it'll be more beautiful if you comb it the other way. It will weaken it a little, but that's okay. We want the beauty over the strength in that case, since it's an elegant garment and it has to look very nice. Tego says that the carder, he should put 3 loops, but not more than that. When we're counting the loops, these stitches, how do you count them? Does that mean one in and out is 1 stitch? So you could do one in and out, another in and out, right? But 3 of them? Or does each in and each, does that count as 1 and out another, and then back in is already 3? And we leave that question standing. It says that you even out along the length, but not along the width. But there's another Braita that says the opposite. And the answer is ha begilima, ha behemyoneh. It depends on different types of garments. If you're talking about a regular garment and you want it to be even, let's say on the bottom where you can see the hem, but a belt is the opposite. Belt, you're wearing, in a perpendicular way to the way you usually wear a garment, and so the belt, you want the width to be even, but you don't care about the end that you're just going to tie into a knot. Tenor Banan, en lochin min hasorek mochin, mipnei she'eno shelo, umakom shenagu liot shelo lochin. A person is not permitted to buy strands from a carder because they don't belong to him. As the Mishnah said, when a carder is combing that wool, a lot of stuff comes off, and so therefore we assume that the Baal Habayit, the owner, wants it back. So if you're buying it from the carder, what is the carder doing with it? Probably he stole it. However, there are places where the custom is that the carder keeps it. If you're in that kind of place, then the carder has it rightfully, and then you can buy it from him. בכל מקום, לוקחין מהן קר מלא מוחין וחסד מלאה מוחין. מה טעמה? קננהו בשינוי. But in any place, you are allowed to buy from the corridor a cushion full that has stuffing made of these strands, or a mattress full of these strands of wool. What's the reason? Even you can do this even in a place where he's not allowed to keep them, and therefore you cannot buy them directly. But if they're in stuffing, then it's okay, because he acquires them through a change of form. Even something that's stolen, once you change it into a different form and doesn't look the same, so it acquires a new name. It's no longer just strands of wool. Now it's a cushion. So he acquires it thereby. Of course, he's still a thief. You'd have to pay the original owner, but the buyer can make a legitimate sale by through that. Tenora banan en lochin migardi lo irin velo nirin velo punkalin velo shiure pikiot. Baraita teaches that one may not buy from a weaver these woolen wads that hold the bobbin in place, or the heddles, or the threads of a bobbin, all these different parts, or the remnants of coils that were on the spool, all different parts of the weaving process, because we assume that they belong to the customer. So the customer would provide these materials, and the weaver would just use them. If the weaver has them, that means he may have stolen them, so you can't buy it. You can buy from a weaver a spotted garment. Now, if it's a spotted garment, probably means he stole little pieces of yarn from different jobs, and then he made, one was blue, one was red. He was doing all things, and he put them all together, and he made a garment out of it. Now, even though they might be stolen, all these threads, still you're allowed, because he made a physical change and turned it into a garment. Or even if he didn't make it into a garment, he just made it into threads, warp threads or weft threads. There are different sizes. Or even if he spun it or wove it, doesn't matter. As long as he made a significant change, you can buy it. We analyze the Braita. Amri hashta tavui vish shakli arug mi ba'ya my arig tichi. Now, why does it have to say so many examples? If you're allowed to buy the thread that he just spun and made into thread, which is a small change, then all the more so if he wove a whole garment out of it. So why do you have to tell me that if it wove a whole garment that you're allowed to buy it? And the answer is no. When it says woven, it doesn't mean like a really nice woven garment, but rather he just twisted into chains, which is just a small change, and even a small change is sufficient for him to acquire it, and then your purchase is a valid purchase. Tenora banan en lochim min hasaba lo otot velo dugmaot velo telushim shel semer aval lochim mehen beged savua tavui begadim hashta tavui shakil begadim ibaya imai begadim namte. Same principle, but now for a dyer. Don't buy from a dyer little pieces of wool as a test or a sample, or a detached piece of wool, because that means that the customer gave him this item. He's supposed to give it back. It belongs to the customer, but he kept them. They're stolen. So you can't buy that. However, if you buy a whole garment of colored things, the dyer took all these little swatches that he had as samples, and he put it together in a fun pattern. And so this cloth is made of all these patches, but you're allowed to buy that because he significantly changed it. That's what the Baraita says. We asked if you're allowed to buy. Oh, you're also allowed to buy a whole garment that's like that, or even spun threads. Or clothes that are made from this. So even threads that are different colors. So he took some of the threads that he was using in dyeing, and he put it together. That's also a significant change. So now we ask, if even threads you're allowed to keep, where that's a relatively small amount of change, then entire garments, do you even have to say? Why do you have to bother saying it? And the answer is, my begadim namte. We're talking about felt. Felt garments are not woven together; they're just pressed together. They're not spun, so they're not made from weaving. But so that's a relatively small amount of processing, and even though they're not very processed, even that you're allowed to keep. Tenor banan hanoten orot la'bedan hakisuin v'atelushin hare elu shel baal habayit v'ha'oleh u'mishatef b'mayim hare elu shelo. If you give some leather to a tanner, and then during the process he's cutting and there's trimmings of it, or detached hairs, all that goes back to the customer. The customer wants it back, they're valuable, and they'll use it for something else. However, whatever comes up when being soaked, you soak that hide in water and some stuff is separated from it, the tanner is allowed to keep that little separated stuff. Imaya shachor. The Mishnah said if the extra things sewn on a garment are black and the garment is white, then the customer does not want them. They don't go look nicely on the garment, and therefore the customer is happy for the launderer to take them away and keep them. Amar Rav Yehuda kasra shemeh ve'kasra shakil le. Rav Yehuda says that a launderer is called a kasra in Aramaic, and it's a good name for him because kasar, the short threads, he can take for himself. These are little threads that are just there to protect the edges of the garment during manufacturing. So these short threads, they're worthy of his name. He keeps them. Amar Rav Yehuda hakol olin leminyan techelet v'yitzchak beri kaped alayhu. The law of sisit is that you have to attach the techelet in a hole near the corner, but it can't be too close to the corner. It has to be at least a thumbnail, meaning from the thumbnail to the knuckle. It has to be that far away from the edge of the garment. That's what the hole. The hole can't be right at the edge. It has to be inside a little. Now, when you're making that determination, you include everything, including the extra strings that are attached to it. That's also included, so that as long, even counting that, if it's far enough from the edge, even including those threads, you're allowed to include the sisit in a hole there. However, Rav Yehuda says, my son Yitzchak is particular about this, and he does not include those threads when he's making the calculation. He makes sure that the hole is even further in than that. A tailor, you give him clothing and you give him some thread to sew it up. If there's a lot of thread left, enough to still use, then he has to give it back. Same thing with the patch. We ask, what does that mean? Enough to continue sewing. How long of a string is enough that it's still useful for sewing? Amarav aseh melo machat chus la machat ibay lehu melo machat v'chus la machat kim lo machat or dima melo machat v'chus la machat mashehu. Rav Aseh answered, it's a length of a needle and beyond the length of a needle. We question, what does Rav Aseh mean by that exactly? Did he mean a length of a needle and beyond that another length of a needle, 2 needle lengths worth? Or did he mean one length of a needle and just a little bit more, basically one a length of a needle? Look how exacting the Gemara wants us to be. Even the extra string, precisely how long is a length of a string that an owner would want returned, or what he doesn't care about. So we try to answer it Tashema. Tetanya chayat sheshira tachut pachut mikedei litpor bo matlit shehi pechuta mishalosh al shalosh bizman shebal habayit makpid alehen hare elu shel bal habayit and the bal habayit makpid alehen hare elu shelo. Braita teaches that if a tailor left over a thread after he finished working, and it was less than amount that you can use to sew with, or a patch, and it was less than 3 by 3. So generally, we saw in our Mishnah, most people don't care about that, so that's why you can keep it. The Braita is adding, well, it really depends, subjective. If the owner cares about it, then you have to return it to the customer. If the customer doesn't care about this small amount, that's even less than the amount that you can use to stitch with, then the tailor keeps it. Now we can derive an answer from this Braita. If you say that we're talking about 2 needle lengths, well, even if it's less than two needle lengths, still you could use it to make one loop. You could make one stitch with it. But if you think that the minimum that the Mishnah was talking about was 1 needle length, then when this Braita says even less than that, what can you use that for? It's too little. It's only the length of a needle. So by the time you put the needle in, then that's it. It runs out of thread. So you can't even make one stitch. So that's impossible that anybody would possibly care, no matter how stingy a person is. Right? There's no one that could possibly care about such a small amount. Therefore, it means that the minimum standard amount of enough to use is 2 needle lengths. Mishnah said a carpenter, what he takes with an adze is only a little bit, those shavings, but with an axe is a lot. He has to give back to the customer. We have a challenge. Urminhu ma shehacharash mosi b'ma'asad v'nifsak b'megera ha'elu shel ba'al habayit v'yosim mitachat makdeyach mitachat rahitni v'hanigrar b'megera hare elu shelo. This braita says what a carpenter removes with an adze, or that comes off with a saw, belong to the customer. So that's where the contradiction is. That the Mishnah says the carpenter keep the adze, shavings, and the Braita says he cannot. The Braita then continues and says that which comes out of a drill, you drill a hole, there's a little sawdust that comes out, or a plane. This is a plane that you go back and forth over the wood and makes it smooth, or if you scrape with a saw. So all that sawdust the carpenter can keep, that's very little. So what do we do with the contradiction about the adze? There's no contradiction that the Tana of our Mishnah was living in a different place where they used the terms differently. In the Tana of Mishnah, they had 2 kinds of such blades. The larger one's called an axe, and the smaller one an adze. And that's why, since the adze that he says is the smaller one, that's why the Mishnah says the carpenter is allowed to keep it. Whereas the Baraita, the Tana of that Baraita, they had just one such tool, and they called it an adze. But actually, what they call adze is really an axe of the Mishnah, and that's therefore big, and that cuts off a lot, and that's why the Baraita said that you have to return to the owner. If the carpenter is doing work in the customer's house, then even the sawdust belongs to the customer. Tanurabanan, mesatete banim en bahem mishum gezel, mefasege ilanot, mefasege gefanim, menakefe hige, menakeshe zeraim ve'odere yirakot, bizman שבעל הבית מקפיד עליהם יש בהם משום גזל. אין בעל הבית מקפיד עליהם הרי אלו שלו. So now we talk about some other professions. Stone chiselers may keep a little bit of the chips of the rock. That's okay. You don't consider that robbery. That's just normal. The owner does not expect to keep the chips of those rocks. Pruner, he's working in the owner's field. So this is similar to the carpenter who we just said, the sawdust is kept by the homeowner. So here, the pruner is just cutting off a little bit of the extra branches to make the bush or the tree healthier. If he prunes trees or prunes vines or trims shrubs or weeds plants or hoes vegetables, then it depends on what the owner thinks. If he cares about it, then the pruner is not allowed to keep it. But if the owner doesn't care about it, then the pruner is allowed to keep the prunings or the weeds that he takes out. More about weeds. Amar Yehuda, keshut vechaziz en behem mishum gezel. Dodder and green grain. Here's dodder. They're not stealable because they're weeds. The owner doesn't plant them, doesn't want them there. You can just take them. The weeder can go and take them. Unless you're in a place where people do care about them and they do like them. Some of this can be used to make beer. So if they're particular about them, then you're not allowed to take them. Ravina says the Mata Mechasya is a place where they do care about the dodder and the green wheat. So don't think you can go to Mata Mechasya and then just pull up some dodder and keep it. That's the last point, which shows that even within these very particular things about just a weed, there's not one standard, right? Just because in your place you say, well, I don't care about this, so therefore I could take it from someone else. No, it depends on each person. Some people are more particular, even about small things, and some places are particular. So you have to respect the people and the places that you're in. Even if you say, why are they being so stingy? That's not your issue to ask why they're so stingy. Your responsibility is to say, I want to make sure I don't steal, not even something that's not even a piece of a thread. If we're so careful to make sure that we don't cheat or steal from someone, even down to sawdust, then certainly we'll be sensitized to people's bigger needs and treat everybody with full respect. And never come to damages, but make sure we deal always with everybody with honesty and integrity. Hazran Allah hagozel batra uselik Allah masechet baba kama hazakim uberuchim. Baruch Adonai leolam. Amen ve'amen.